June 2021. Welcome to those members of the public. This meeting is being recorded. It's on the Council's website. It's also being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. In terms of health and safety, we are in a non-smoking facility. There is a defibrillator in the unlikely event of being used in the front of house on the ground floor. In terms of fire and emergency, to exit where the green signs are, and we evacuate to the assembly area in the clock tower of Te Marae Hine, the square, and toilets are in the link span as you come in. If there's any incident, please report it to the committee administrator. Just remind councillors and presenters if they could just use their name before speaking. And we will just go to our order of business, and our first one there is apologies, and that the committee resolve apologies be received from Councillor Michelad and absent on council business. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. There are no other apologies. We will vote, please. It has passed, 15 votes for and none against. Thank you. Moving through to number 2, notification of any additional items. I have received none. None from the floor. Declarations of interest, if any. Again, nobody has notified. None from the floor. We'll now move to number 4, which is the confirmation of the minutes. That the committee resolve that the minutes of the Committee of Council meeting of the 9th of June 2021, Part 1 public, be confirmed as a true and correct record, as amended. And it's on page 7 of your papers. And there is one slight amendment on page 13, and it's to better reflect halfway down the page around the motion to allocate 880,000, currently not on the plan, to program 1127, the Bonsai Shade House, the famous Bonsai Shade House. To better reflect and be more accurate, staff have recommended that we put recommendation from committee to allocate. And no questions to that? Right. I'm happy to move those. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Any other matters arising? There being none, we will look to vote, please. That has passed, 15 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right, moving through to number 5, adoption of Council's strategic direction, page 35 of your papers, and just invite David Murphy. And Julie up to speak to this. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, Mr Mayor, councillors. Julie's done all the hard work pulling together the various amendments to the strategies and plans. There's also the city spatial plan and the asset management plans. I think this is a case where there is a lot of paper, but not a lot to say. So the deliberations that you held on Wednesday and Friday, a week or two ago, have been translated through into a number of changes in either the strategies, the plans, the numbers that make up the LTP or the LTP. So not every decision that you made on Wednesday or recommendation or decision you made on last Wednesday or Friday or the week before requires an explicit sort of paragraph or text in a strategy or plan, but I can assure you we've been through all of those recommendations and made the changes that are required, so we're happy to answer any questions.
I have a number, but before we go there, I've got other councillors. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So just on a couple of occasions, both when we were workshopping and then later, we discussed adding a sentence around the Connected Communities strategy to recognise our commitment to being a refugee resettlement city. And so there is a sentence in the strategy, but I wondered if the officers could just comment whether or not that's all we can put in, or whether we should be making it a stronger statement to reflect the actual position. Thank you. Just trying to find it, sorry.
I've got the searches here, if you want.
Okay, that's good.
Kia koto, councillors. I think the answer to that is entirely up to you. I think while we have talked about in the strategy Palmerston North being a resettlement city, using that language and talking about welcoming communities program, I guess there's a balance to making sure that these strategies and plans don't overstate council's commitment or position in any given area. And I think given the relatively modest resources that this council puts towards, say, resettlement issues, then it may be that you consider that the words that are there are an accurate reflection of that position, but it's given that it's a strategic statement, it's entirely up to you as to whether you want to make different statements.
So the statement, which is at the start of the Goal 3 Connected Communities strategy, just says Palmerston North is a refugee resettlement city. And I suppose my understanding of the discussion that we had was that we had wanted to be a little bit firmer than that and say maybe as a committed refugee resettlement city, or is, you know, that it would be an affirmation of our commitment to that position. That, I mean, that might be you know, semantics, but at the same time, that just seems to me to be, I understand it's a descriptor, but it's quite a plain kind of statement.
Councillor, which page is that on?
Sorry, it's in attachment 1.
Yes.
And I've got the paper copy here. It's in about halfway through on page 1 of the Connected Communities strategy. I've sort of given up with the iPad because there's so many hundreds of pages, sorry.
So if I could help, so in the strategy, the sentence that Councillor Johnson has talked about describes Palmerston North as a resettlement city. Then in the community development chapter, it talks about Palmerston North as an established welcoming community under a national program. Council recognises that communities are healthier, happier and more productive when newcomers are welcomed and participate fully in society and in the local economy. So yeah, as I said, happy to answer a question, but I think it's probably really up to councillors if you want to change that language. Have no problem with that.
Okay, thank you. My other question is around the climate change goals in the climate change plan, again in attachment 1. So it says that on page 4 of that strategy, it says the 10-year plan levels of service for this plan, and then under the bullet points it says to achieve the target of a 25% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2028, and I thought we had updated that to a 30% reduction by 2031. And I wonder if that just hasn't been updated, or if it's my misunderstanding.
That's a typo.
Okay, so that it just needs changing. Yeah, cool. I've got a question about programme lines, but is that coming when we do the 10-year plan as a whole?
Yeah, I think so. There's a mountain of paperwork here.
Yeah,
so,
I know, it's a bit confusing. So those are my questions on strategies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple. So just on urban development, city growth plan. It's under that separate cover. It's got the large yellow pages. At the bottom there of page 3 is we talk about capacity for approximately 300 greenfield residential sections. greenfield housing development is predominantly occurring in Katori. Is that just short term?
That's what's zoned now and available today. So obviously the plan changes we're working on will significantly increase that.
Should there be a comment that sort of, because if somebody was reading this, they think our city's only got 300.
Yeah, that's under the heading, where are we now? So there's then a section about what do we want to achieve and what actions are we going to take to get there. So the where are we now is set in the context. So I think that bullet point actually highlights that there's some work to do in that space, which reflects the actions that follow and the work that's happening now.
And I understand that there is a recommendation for sort of minor amendments and typos, because, I mean, there is a couple of throughout it. Also, it says in terms of, on the next page on business, that there is limited opportunities for small-scale industrial activity. Is that an officer assumption, or is there some facts around that?
So our last housing and business needs assessment identified that there was further work required to provide small to medium industrial land. So as part of the work, the package of work that the planning team are working on at the moment includes starting to look at some additional land for, the North East Industrial Zone, Central New Zealand distribution hubs for the big stuff. But there's further work happening and a range of sites being looked at the moment for some small to medium. So it's based on the housing and business needs assessment that's been adopted.
Okay, thank you. And that probably leads into my next question around the housing business needs assessment. I identified a need to undertake a targeted review of business zones. So is this in train, or is this to come?
So that work's underway as well. So the general feeling of officers and advice to councillors that the business zones are working well. However, there is some questions about the extent and use of the fringe business zone particularly, which for large format retailing, as to whether we've actually peaked out in our demand in that space. So, for instance, we've got some sites down Rangatiki Street that have been vacant for a while. So the targeted review is about making sure that the business zones continue to operate as expected, but having a closer look at the fringe business zone particularly.
And just on that, the next the next column, it talks around additional national policy statements relating to basically around the protection of productive soils, will be gazetted in 2021. As we already have a policy of not building over high-class soils, is that for everybody, or is that just going to be metropolitan cities?
So the work being undertaken by MFE or the government on a national policy statement, that would apply to everybody. So it would be similar to the national policy statement on housing, it would be a national directive.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'll go to Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. David and Julie, thank you. Just a question around the spatial plan and sort of how it sat in the draft and obviously now, and there was an explainer paragraph there, which I appreciate. But just, I guess, really trying to understand the change process there, in that so this is going from having an option for an upstream additional bridge to not having that option. I guess just wanted to really understand the sort of change process there, because as I understand it, all the other sort of changes that had been made sort of came through the chamber, whereas this one just sort of arrived. So can you just, was it already in train? Was it triggered by observations from submitters? What sort of brought it to light at this stage?
There's a couple of things. One was probably a reflection on the content of the Waka Katahi PNITI Network Options Report, which has a preference for a downstream bridge as a priority. And I think what we're trying to do with the spatial plan is provide as much certainty to government, private investors, community about what the foreseeable plan is. So that was the first thing. So I think an upstream bridge, you know, depending on the time horizon you think about, is still a potential or a possibility, but it would probably form part of more of the urban transport network rather than the inter-regional network. But the other factor was there was one submission in particular from Bruce Wilson, which identified that issue when he presented, and listening to Bruce and then reflecting on the listening to Bruce made me reflect on the content of the spatial plan and the network options report, and as a result have recommended that slight change to the spatial plan, so that actually reflects what is our most immediate sort of planning information with respect to the ring road.
Thanks. That's a helpful context. I guess I'm still trying to a little bit understand, I guess, the standing of that then, because the terminology here is around just receiving that information rather than adopting it, and sort of what weight that has as a council-led change, or sort of what status that ultimately has.
So the spatial plan, the updated spatial plan is a recommendation to committee. So then once it's adopted, those recommendations are adopted by council, the council would be adopting this as the formal city spatial plan. So the city spatial plan was part of the information and material made available for consultation. Yeah, so, sorry, actually Julie's just pointing out to me that the word received is at the end of recommendation 4. I actually think my advice would be the city spatial plan is adopted alongside, just like a strategy and plan.
All right, thank you. That's helpful, Mr. Mayor.
Good. Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, David and Julie. Just looking at under the Committee of Council under separate cover in Appendix 1. So I'm sorry, there's no great page numbers in this, so it's quite hard to find. I'm under economic development in here, looking at measures of success. Have you found where I am? It just says page number 5. So it's under economic development. Yeah?
Sorry, without the explicit page numbers, it's proving a little challenging.
I know.
It's this page, David, with the people underneath.
It's got the,
Perhaps ask your, happy to answer your question. Give it a go.
At the bottom.
Yes, I've got
Okay.
this one.
Okay, looking at the measures of success, it just says like more businesses in the city. What are we benchmarking that against? What does more businesses in the city mean? Like more than what?
So we do some reporting about, there are definitions of what a business is, and so that's something we're able to check over time.
So just so
As
there's
in
a
registered
benchmark.
businesses.
But so there's the benchmark. It just seems a bit meaningless if there isn't anything to benchmark it against.
So this is one of many measures that we report on as trend data over time. So some of these things are things that we're already reporting on in different ways, either through the dashboards or through the quarterly economic reporting in this instance. So while this plan doesn't specifically give a number of businesses now, what we're looking at is reporting the change over the next 3 years and then, of course, the next 10 years in terms of the data that is available about registered businesses.
And the same with the improving the survival rate of new local businesses. So
Yes, so the death rate essentially of new businesses is something that gets reported with about an 18-month or 2-year lag. That's something that's reported on the dashboard at the moment. So you can see whether that's going up, down or sideways in terms of a trend over time.
okay, thank you.
So if I could just add, each of those measures gives a direction of travel that the council is looking for. It doesn't state the source of that data or or what the state situation is specifically at the moment, because otherwise these documents will be twice as long.
Yeah, I understand that. It just is, it's a bit meaningless when it doesn't have a benchmark. Well, that's just, sorry, I shouldn't go into comment. Sorry about that.
Councillor Dennison.
Actually, just realising that's probably in a different section on the vision and goals when we get to the LTP rather than this around the council strategies. Thank you.
Okay. I've just got a couple more, just still on where we were with city growth plan. And it's on page 7, and it's where we have new and one-off actions, and it's around developing a future development strategy. And involvement of partners is only identifying rangatane. Would the development community not be part of that naturally? And underneath it, it's around identifying council and government land for future market and affordable housing.
I might just, David can answer that, but I might just make a comment about the involvement of partners in general. So if you cast your minds way back to one of the very early workshops, there was some discussion about making sure that this column wasn't just a list of all our friends and neighbours, and that it was actually really important that it became strategic partners in general. So often there is an implication, for example, that the general community is involved. There is an implication that if something's to do with community organisations, that of course they will be part of it. We just haven't listed all the parties in each of those instances. But as to that particular instance, Dave may be able to respond.
Yeah, Julie's preface is useful in terms of this response. So, I mean, quite clearly when we're developing a future development strategy, there'll be a range of partners involved, and actually the national policy statement directs who needs to be involved in that as well. So we, clearly landowners, developers, infrastructure providers, but as Julie said, I think with the involvement of partners in these lists of actions, if we start to list all the stakeholders involved in every action, the table will become very cluttered very quickly, so it is more the strategic partners in this case. Okay, so that probably goes to the next one underneath. Would we not have central government ministries involved if we're talking about possible land and LINs, organisations like that? The one underneath in terms of identify council, yeah, certainly, government, kāinga ora. I mean, it would be a range, depending on the nature of the land, it could be a range of government departments, so it could just be, central government or government agencies. And just on the next page 15, a couple over, it talks about ongoing actions, and this is one around reviewing the district plan with priority around the business zone, the residential zone, and I suppose this is a bit of a question and a comment. We're very good at lining up all the government business box, but actually the commercial sector, like the Real Estate Institute, the property investors, possibly the Chamber of Commerce or CEDA, are not listed there. We've got government or quasi-government organisations or ourselves, and obviously master builders, but there must be more than that. Yeah, I guess this certainly. I think business stakeholders, or so we could add something to that effect. Yeah. And just on the page 2 over number 17, and it's around what actions will we take to get there, and it's around the citywide vegetation framework. And just want to make sure that we capture the upcoming tree policy. Yes, so there's a specific action in the city shaping plan to review the citywide vegetation framework, and there was a sentence added to also, as part of that, develop a tree policy. So there's explicit action on that in this case in another plan, but it's one of those ones where there's a big overlap. So, okay, as long as we do capture it, because it has been a little bit of missing in action. And just a couple of pages over under the Economic Development Plan, which includes international relations. And
it's around page 5, and it's again ongoing actions through CEDA and involvement of partners. Our regional growth plan, Accelerate 25, is missing from that. We should really mention that somewhere. We've got everybody else bar them.
And the involvement of partners?
Yes.
Yep, happy. I mean, I think that's an acceptable minor amendment. It's important that we're connecting both ways with A25 and A25 with us.
Yeah. And I suppose moving over, just while I've got you there, page 15, when we talk specifically around international relations and ongoing actions, we should really put in there continuing to participate with Sister Cities New Zealand. That's all I've got.
Sorry, just on that last one, was that an additional action or?
Well, it should, I mean, it should be listed somewhere either as a partner or, I mean, they play a reasonably significant role, and we have in the past with them, but they're not mentioned at all, and it is in international relations.
Yeah, I think that's acceptable additional ongoing action.
It probably is happening anyway, but just making sure it's noted. All right, councillors, are there any other questions? Okay, all right, thank you. Right, we have 4 pages of recommendation. 5 now, apparently. So this is the adoption of the council's strategic direction. I just want to thank the officers because there's a huge amount of work's gone into this. The committee recommends that the strategies and plans listed below and attached to the memorandum titled Adoption of Council's Strategic Direction presented to the Committee of Council on the 23rd of June 2021 are adopted as the strategic direction underpinning our 2021-31 10-year plan. And they include innovative and growing city strategy, city growth plan, economic development plan, transport plan, creative and livable city strategy, which includes active communities plan, arts and heritage plan, city shaping plan, and continuing that theme, connected communities strategy, connected communities plan, and also the safe communities plan. Under our eco-city strategy, the climate change plan, the environmental sustainability plan, the Manawatu River plan, resource recovery plan, and waters plan. And then under governance and active citizenship plan, and then that we recommend number 2 that the city spatial plan attached in the memorandum titled Adoption of Council's Strategic Direction presented to the Committee of Council on the 23rd of June 2021 is adopted. And number 3, that the strategies and plans attached in the memorandum titled Adoption of Council Strategic Direction presented to the Committee of Council on the 23rd of June 2021 replace the strategic framework adopted by Council on the 11th of June 2018. And number 4, that the executive summaries of the asset management plans listed below and attached to the memorandum titled Adoption of Council Strategic Direction presented to the Committee of Council on the 23rd of June 2021 are received. And these include asset management plans for parks and reserves, AMP for property, AMP for resource recovery, AMP for stormwater, AMP for transport, AMP for wastewater, AMP for water. And 5, that the committee resolves that any minor amendments are able to be made to the attached documents prior to publication with the agreement of the Mayor and Deputy Mayor. That's a mouthful. Right. I'll look to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So just a quick comment around the eco-city goals. I've noticed at another point in another document that the goal isn't correct either, and I assume that altering that will come under the minor amendments, but I just want to double check that since it is one of the major goals. Are you happy that that
Yes.
is going to come under a minor amendment?
Absolutely, and we'll ensure that, and I'm sure officers are writing this down, and it's imprinted in my brain as well. So thank you for noting that.
Okay, that's good. And just another comment really, which is that I think that the way that the strategies were presented this time round for consultation was very helpful. The kind of little wheel with the inner circle and the outer circle for the plans and the colour coding, I think made it quite user-friendly. And I understand that we don't really want to refer to too much programme stuff in the plans and the strategies themselves. But I personally would have liked to have seen a little bit more positive commitment to being a refugee resettlement city. And my understanding of what we discussed in the workshop was that we were going to do that. So, you know, it's not really a good idea to be changing policy on the fly. So I'm not going to suggest an amendment now, but I just think maybe we bear in mind for future LTP policy type things that in terms of stating where we're at, that we use some positive language for things that are key aspects of what we're doing as a city. So, you know, it is a key component of us as a city, I think, particularly at the governance level, of championing being a refugee resettlement city. And I guess I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that language in the strategy up front. I'm not going to suggest it changes now, but that's just a comment. But other than that, happy with the certainly the direction of travel and the presentation of the strategies, which I think was very helpful this time round. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When we were most recently working on this was, I think we're all feeling a bit exhausted at the end of a Friday, and I didn't make anything by way of comment then, but just did want to take a moment to acknowledge the staff and the huge amount of work that team has done. It's been quite a journey, so certainly wanted to convey that thanks. I think there's been quite a bit of editorializing already of the plans and where it's gotten to, so I won't feel a need to go too far down that track, but I think simply to also thank and acknowledge the community's input. I really feel that reflecting on the input that came through the submission process and what we're actually sitting with today, we can genuinely say that it is a better plan for the community's input and effort, and do want to acknowledge the tremendous effort, again, that the team put in to engaging with the community on this, and acknowledge the community for having their say in the process.
Councillor Dennison.
Just prompted with Councillor Johnson referring to our eco city goal not being what's in the papers, and just saying the conversation around doing that under minor amendments. I just want to, for clarity, because it's referenced in different parts in our document, just for public record, so we're not mixing that up. If I could ask that before I comment further, just a clarity of what is the goal meant to be.
Through the Chair, I think we're talking about the target. Is that what we're referring to? So yes. In the Eco-City strategy, it says 30% reduction in CO2 emissions in Palmerston North by 2031. So that is the correct statement, and if it's anywhere else any differently, then that can be updated. It's just a typo. So it is correctly written in the strategy. Okay,
and just to follow on, just for clarity, in the document that I was referencing that I'd ask later on, but it does relate to these documents, it's got a bracketed from the 2018 baseline. I just wanted to also work out if that's bracketed phrasing, because the goals have been unchanged for like our innovative and growing city, that it's 12,000 more jobs by 2031, and should that be bracketed from the 2018 baseline? I want to just get consistency across what we're measuring it, so we can see if we've achieved.
Through the Chair, so the measures are with the emissions data is to do with the availability of data. It's a lot easier to get jobs data than it is to get emissions data. So my understanding is that that's bracketed there for that reason, is because that's the benchmark we have available for emissions, whereas it's different for jobs. We have a new target.
Okay, we've got a new target. All right, maybe with a clarification. I've got no further comment. I just wanted...
Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, just to be specific, the 25% is referenced in the climate change plan. So that's the bit that needs changing. And it's also referenced, we're not on this document yet, but when we come to the 10-year plan supporting material, it's also referenced on page, I believe, 89. Yeah, page 89. Thank you.
And I just encourage councillors, if you do spot that, just to pop it in an email to us, please. Okay, so we have the recommendations in front of us. I just want to reiterate the great work that's gone on. If you can recall, before we went through this big piece of work in 2018, there was Member Peter Smith that came to see us from Adelaide, and he was talking about making sure that less was best, but also doing a lot of good work within those goals and plans that sit underneath those strategies. So I think we've done some really good work and acknowledged the combined efforts of all the staff. So with that, I think we'll vote. It has passed 15 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, we move through to number 6 on our order paper, and it's around approving the 2021-31 10-year plan, long-term plan for audit. And I'll ask that David Murphy and CFO Stuart McKinnon please speak to this. It's page 141.
As per the last item, lots of paper, but not a huge amount to say. So we've made the changes from the deliberations. So today you're approving the plan to go to audit. So once audit have reviewed that plan, it comes back on the 7th of July for final approval with the audit report. I think as we've indicated previously, we anticipate the audit result will be the same as it was with the draft. There were some errors with the development contributions table, so they've been there's been a document circulated. So, yeah, happy to answer any questions.
And I guess want to take this moment, I guess, to thank our staff for putting this together. When we first printed a copy of the long-term plan, there were a number of errors, and when you dig down to the root cause, it's because those changes will be made between 5 o'clock and midnight on the Friday after your meeting, and this is kind of acceptable. So I guess, from my perspective, I want to acknowledge the staff and the huge effort it takes to put a document like this together. It's a massive effort. There is possibly going to be some typos and some errors, and so we're obviously happy to correct them, but I just thought it important to publicly acknowledge quite how much work goes into this. There'll be a few people who will be looking forward to a weekend should this pass.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. Right, couple of questions from me. So the table of table 5 around residential fees, and it's talking around roading, subdivision, building consent or service connections. Can you just give me an understanding of what they've altered from? I've got all these new figures here, but what just in a quick sense, have they adjusted by thousands, or are they tweaked?
I think I can answer this in saying that they are tweaked based on the decisions that were made through the previous committee of council decisions around which programs are growth related. So some of those new programs that have changed and some of the ones that have come out have made some impact on that. So I don't know the exact numbers, but I think it's just tweaking because of the changes that were made.
Okay, thank you. I have a level of confidence over that. That's good. Councillor Johnson.
Well, it's a bit of a detailed question, sorry, but on page 80 and 81, 80 of the attachment, under Connected and Safe Community Operational ID programmes, what we've ended up with is 2 programmes for additional funding for strategic priority grants, one from the 2018 long-term plan and one from this long-term plan, and the same with increase to Community Development Small Grants Fund, one from the 2018 and one from now. And that's just a bit confusing. We ran into a little bit of trickiness with this when we were going through the programmes line by line, and I wonder if the CFO will be open to either amalgamating them or making one business as usual or something.
Yes, I'm very open to amalgamating them, and perhaps we make that as a minor amendment. Going forward, we'll create one program and put them both together.
Yeah, I think that would be easier. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just had a couple questions about the significance and engagement policy on next to the last page of our papers. I think it's 263. So one relates to the requirement through, as I understand it, the Local Government Act for any of these to be moved off of our books to happen through a long-term plan process, and sort of how that marries up with our expectation that the 3 waters may very well get moved off our books within the next 3 years, and I assume there's going to be some mechanism that avoids triggering another long-term plan process to make a change that's sort of already in the pipeline.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of those situations where we anticipate the legislation will provide some specific direction about what is and isn't required. So I think that's a wait and see. But I'd imagine the legislation will take dominance over the significance and engagement policy. But there may be a requirement in the legislation for local councils to consult, but all of that is to be confirmed.
Yeah, and I can probably just throw out there, we'll be in no doubt that moving the 3 waters will trigger the significance policy.
Indeed. Won't move into comment on that. The other question that I had was around sort of the list of all the different assets, and that I guess I've just never really had it explained to me in terms of why we just say with the Civic Administration Building just the bit that's in Te Maraehini, and why we're silent on the Conference and Function Centre, as like just within the collection of council buildings, it seems like just about everything else is on the list.
Sorry, could you use a microphone?
Significance and engagement policy is to identify those assets that the city couldn't function without. And if, for example, a conference and function centre was unavailable, there are other places where conferences could be held. That's the rationale for it.
Any comment on the balance of the Civic Administration Building?
Same thing. This part is special. The other part is more like office space. So again, a similar sort of argument.
All right, thank you. Mr. Mayor.
All right, are there any further comments? All right, there being none, thank you, Stuart, thank you, David. Right, we've got here the recommendations in front of us around approving the 2021-31 10-year plan, our long-term plan for audit, and that the committee recommends one, that the 2021 revenue and financing policy as shown in the draft of the 10-year plan, long-term plan, separately attached as Appendix 2 be adopted. Number 2, that the 2021 Development Contributions Policy, separately attached as Appendix 3, be adopted. Number 3, that the 2021 Significance and Engagement Policy, separately attached as Appendix 4, be adopted. And there's one more, that the committee resolve number 4, that the 2021-31 10-year plan, long-term plan, separately attached as Appendix 1, be referred to Audit New Zealand and presented to Council on the 7th of July 2021 for approval. Number 5, that any minor amendments are able to be made to the attached documents prior to publication with the agreement of the Mayor and Deputy Mayor. So look, I'm happy to move all of those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll now open it up for any comments. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll keep my comments brief. I'd just like to ask that recommendation 4 be taken separately, and I'd just like to explain my position on that. But firstly, also want to acknowledge the amazing work of the staff throughout this process, and I think, you know, as elected members came up with many questions, I was sometimes amazed at the quality and the speed at which those answers came back to us, which certainly helped in our decision-making process. I am supportive of the policies in the first three, to support the policies in the first 3 recommendations. I won't be supporting recommendation 4, and I just want to explain my reason. I acknowledge that we need to refer the plan to audit, and that's a legal requirement. However, the content on page 142 in explaining this recommendation says that we will be confirming that the plan contains the desired levels of service, programs and budgets. And in my view, whilst there are many, in fact the majority of the programs within this plan I'm very supportive of, I think the sum of the parts adds up to more than what some in our community can afford, and it adds up to more than what banks will lend us to actually deliver. And obviously that's been well outlined throughout this process, and we've talked about it being a priority LTP, and I guess my view is that I don't believe we've hit the right balance in terms of how we've prioritised. And I think in terms of, you know, the process we've got in front of us, sure, there's a Three Waters decision that will need to be made, but I think many of the additional programs and additional costs that we've included in the plan and added into the plan 2 weeks ago perhaps could have been better considered after that Three Waters decision will be made, when we're in a better position of what our financials will look going forward. Yeah, I don't believe the plan that we've got is prudent. I think asking the community for $9 million additional funds a year for the next 3 years is more than what I think is reasonable to put on our community, and I do think there have been decisions that we could have made to minimise the impact of that. On page 145, it says that the Act requires the Council to manage its finances prudently and in a way that promotes the current and future interests of the community. My view is that I don't believe we've got the balance right in terms of the long-term impact of the sort of borrowing that is included in this plan. I do feel sorry for the auditors to have another look at this. I think they made it really clear how unfavourable the report that came back from the auditors when it was in a draft, how unfavourable that was. We've only made the situation worse since then in terms of increasing the costs and increasing the borrowing, so I only expect that we'll get another unfavourable report back from the auditors. So that I just wanted to clarify my reasons for voting against recommendation 4. Thanks.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Well, I will be voting for all of the recommendations, and I just wanted to make some comments as to why. So the first thing is that, as we all know, we were advised by staff that we needed to increase the amount we were spending on renewals, and not increase it a little bit, increase it quite significantly. And a lot of the increase in rates that we're looking at over the next 3 years is a result of that accelerated renewals programme. And I think it's important that we do give that due emphasis. Often, by the time we get to this stage, you know, we're looking at something we did last week. We forget the work that that's gone in over the year 18 months before. And I'm pleased that as a council, we're looking at what level of renewals we actually need to be spending, because I don't want us to be in a situation that we're seeing in other councils across the country where their communities are looking at failures. We are being proactive. We're putting extra renewals in every year of the next 3 years, and I think that has gone a little bit kind of unnoticed, really, in some of the headline other stuff that's been discussed. So I really wanted to start with that because I think that that's quite significant. The other thing that we've done is we've responded to submissions, and I was really heartened actually by the way that we really listened to community submissions and responded to them in proactive ways in that 10-year plan deliberations, 2 days. You know, sometimes we hear from the community that they think it's not worthwhile making a submission. I think what we could say as a result of those 2 days is it was a very worthwhile community making submissions. We had gone out with a pretty pared down long-term plan, the best we could come up with, and community said to us, actually, you know, what about this need? What about the other need? And we tried to see what we could do for them. And so I was really heartened by some of those decisions that we were able to make over those 2 days. Yes, it has added to the rates bill, but that's in the context of last year. Instead of us going out with a 4.4 rates increase, we went out with a 1.9. So last year we had an extremely tight budget and community got a very small rate increase. And you can't keep doing that. It's an unfortunate aspect of local government that nobody really wants to pay rates and nobody wants their rates to increase. But at the same time, people want good services and they want their pipes not to burst. And so we're in a situation where if we want to make sure that we've got adequate renewals and we're doing what we should be doing, responding to community need, then the rates are going to be more than 1.9% this year, because we've got catch-up from last year to do, as well as substantial increase in renewals. So I think, on the whole, I'm quite happy with this long-term plan. And in terms of audit, we were very well aware when we put this together that it was never going to pass audit, because we are the first cab off the rank with a very large wastewater plant to be funded in year 4. And there's just no way that we could make those numbers work unless we slashed and burned a lot of our programs and significantly reduced levels of service. And I don't think that the community would have wanted us to do that at all. So to cut to the chase, I'm very happy to vote for it. I think that the increased spending on renewals is laudable. I think the response to submissions from the community is very heartening, and I think that the next 3 years are perfectly well balanced, and by the time we're coming to do another long-term plan, we'll know what we're dealing with water. Thank you.
No other councillors in the queue, so I'll just comment as perhaps a little bit of right of reply too. And I think Councillor Johnson summed it up. It's just, I urge you to vote for this, by the way, and I hope you will. It's about balance, and we can only control what we can control, and it really is the next 3 years. I know this has got 10 years in front of it, and I'll come back to that in a moment around Audit New Zealand and Standard & Poor's, who had quite different views on our position. 80%, as Councillor Johnson did say, 80% of this is around infrastructure, and I think it would be very foolish to keep rates artificially low. We would be a headline immediately, looking at the media. And the other 20% has been on our people and submissions. And responding to those submissions positively. We couldn't with everything, but we did where we could. Look, we know the winds of change are upon us, and I think the plan has struck some balance. We have an opportunity, if we feel things aren't quite right, in an annual budget process to tweak things. But we know also that Audit New Zealand their qualifications over 10 years. But yet Standard & Poor's, that's where I really look to, is their rating is over the next 3 years. And they're almost at extremes. One saying can't do anything, the other one saying over the next 3 years you're very well balanced. So I would favour the Standard & Poor's, and what we can control is the next 3 years. We know the government will be doing some major changes to our sector in the next year, really, and then they'll be able to tell us where we're heading thereafter. So, councillors, please, I'd ask you to vote for this. We can put all the scaremongering around, but actually, it's actually a very good outcome considering what we're faced with. So, ask you to vote accordingly.
Excuse me, Mr Mayor, which recommendations are we voting on at the moment?
1, 2, 3 and 5. That has passed 16 votes for and none against. And we will now vote on number 4 only. And that has passed 15 votes for and 1 against. And councillors, that is now, I declare the meeting closed. So thank you for your attendance. Thank you to the officers.